Hello, Read 585, and welcome to part 2 of our lectures this week. This is the content for the week where we are talking about approaches to quality professional learning and support. So the objectives we are working on are first to be able to identify the principles of effective professional learning. And then also through the articles this week, you'll get to see an application of those principles. So in chapter 10 of your course text, they give you ideas for different approaches and talk a little bit about them. But then the articles actually do an in-depth look at schools and how they implemented different approaches and the success they had with those. And then the second objective is to formulate a structure for developing and delivering professional learning, which is ultimately going to be what you do for part 3 of your assignment. So be thinking of that as you go into this week and this unit, really paying attention to what are characteristics of effective professional learning, how can you apply that to your case study scenario in order to, design a really nice structure for high quality learning. So chapter 10 is on providing professional support. And the first thing that the authors want you to know is that it is essential to have a collaborative school-wide culture or the beginnings of it in order for professional support to work. So if that is not currently in place at your case study site, you may want to begin there with the professional learning and work you're doing, talking about collaboration, why it's important, and really getting that unified vision. And this reminded me of stages of team development from Dufour's PLC at Work, which we'll talk more about PLCs next week. But this nice reproducible here goes over the stages of team development. And it talks about how one of the earliest stages is filling the time. Like basically with meetings, people are just rambling. There isn't a clear purpose of, how we're spending the time together and what we're doing. Frustration is high because people feel like time is being wasted. And then, they kind of move into sharing personal practices. So maybe there's more trust and collaboration happening there. They see, the need for collaboration, but still, the output in the product is low. And so then this goes through how they progress into, developing actually assessments together, analyzing student work, differentiating follow-up, and then reflecting on instruction. So just wanted to use this to show you that you have to be able to take the teacher teams from meetings where they're filling the time to where they're actually reflecting on teaching and learning, analyzing student work. And you can't get there if you don't have trust among teammates, because they have to be vulnerable and willing to discuss weaknesses or data that may show, a disconnect or, something not working well in their classroom. And then they also have to be bought into that common vision. So that is very important before you can get your professional learning off and running. All right, so must have collaborative culture. They then give us the definition of professional support, and they're using that term in place of professional development or professional learning very intentionally, because in their minds, professional support encompasses all of the ways that literacy coaches assist teachers in understanding, implementing, and evaluating literacy development and the literacy program. So traditionally with PD, we think of the sit and get hour plus workshop type sessions, right? But they kind of want to flip that notion on its head and have you think about the many different approaches to professional learning. It's not just a workshop for all teachers at the site, but maybe you're doing things, in different formats and structures, doing different sessions based on grade level needs, doing PLC cycles, doing model lessons with observation, reflection, and lesson planning. So the end of the chapter gives you 4 different approaches to professional support aside from the traditional workshop model. And then lastly, with just some kind of notes before we get talking, is that professional support really is a balancing act between developing knowledge and instructional skills within the environment of the school. So you need to have both, and you need to be able to, effectively teach teachers both of these things. So you want to build their knowledge level, but, if they have all this new knowledge and it's not going into practice because they don't have the instructional skills, then nothing's going to get implemented. However, if you're telling them what to do and how to do it, so here's, what instructional skills we're developing, but you don't give them the knowledge behind them, then they're going to have a very shallow implementation of, these instructional skills. So they need to have the knowledge and the background behind it to understand the best way to carry it out in the classroom and make adjustments as needed. So keep that in mind. Professional support should be building both knowledge and instructional skill, which is why it needs to be active learning. So you're teaching them, a new strategy or technique or some research, but then you're giving them an opportunity to practice this in their classroom or maybe see it modeled and demonstrated, and then coming back together and reflecting on how it went. So it really needs to be very hands-on, very active, not just here, sit and absorb all this knowledge, and we'll hope one day you go and try it out in your classroom. So in your text on page 196, they give you this figure 10.2, which is a school-wide professional support system. And as you'll see, it's a cycle. And typically we start with the professional development with curriculum support. So whatever that might be, your professional support that you provide. Now, the goal of this professional support is to see a change in teachers' instruction. So, if you're doing all this great learning as a staff, but it's not being carried out into teacher practice, then it's all for naught. So there needs to be an effect on students, or this professional support you're providing is just not effective. And the way to know if there are changes in instruction is by getting into classrooms and observing to see the change, having teachers share out and give feedback on, how the implementation is going. Then after, they have an opportunity to apply it in their classrooms, they need an opportunity to sit and reflect. And that's how, you see, they're likely trying out something new. So, new kind of challenges and pitfalls and questions and issues are going to arise. So, here would be a good time to do some one-on-one targeted observations and feedback cycles so that you can problem solve and collaborate with the teachers about how the implementation is going and how to make it more effective. And that's going to increase both the frequency of which they're, applying what they're doing in the classroom, as well as the quality of the implementation. So, after they've done their knowledge building, they've had time to implement it in the classroom, get feedback and reflect on their success or lack thereof and how to improve. Then hopefully they're going to have some increased pedagogical content knowledge, because at this point they've been able to implement new ideas. But a lot of times this may lead to lower feelings of self-efficacy, because they're realizing, this, whatever you guys are working on as a staff, is clearly needed because it should be based on the data and something that's not already occurring to the level that it needs to be. And so they're going to kind of reach a point where they are not feeling very successful as a teacher, and they may realize that previous instruction was truly ineffective. So that's great, though. I mean, that's the sign that they're learning something. So you want to be there to support them with that. And then, provide support systems that allow for continued implementation. So this would be something like teacher teams meeting to discuss, how this has all been going on and goals to continue that, different things of that nature. And then, We want to be looking for changes in achievement. So, when you're creating this initial professional development, you want to think about what are the measures that we are going to put in place to determine the effectiveness of this. So there should be measures for teacher practice, like how it's being implemented, but then also measures for student achievement. So because of this learning, we're doing and implementing, there should be changes in achievement. So you want to embed assessments into your plan so that after it's been implemented for a certain amount of time, a set amount of time that you've determined, you can get the data out from those assessments, typically curriculum-based measures, and find evidence of measurable student improvement. And that's so critical because without positive changes in achievement, we don't anticipate any changes on teacher belief systems. So it's really hard to change teacher belief systems. But if you can, open them up to the potential and the need for whatever your professional support is, use that data to show, hey, what we're doing is just not effective. We need to really, come together as a site and focus on this area of instruction, this subgroup of students, whatever it may be. And then invest them in this idea, and here's what we're going to do, and here's the research that supports what we're going to be doing, and then we're going to be, implementing and then measuring how it went. And then you will likely see change in belief structures as a natural outgrowth of professional support systems. So, this is something that's difficult to directly target, but going through this cycle in a very intentional way will help them to see, oh yeah, maybe this is something beneficial to my practice. So I recommend you check out the pages that explain this in more depth, because this is going to be something I'm looking for when you develop your professional learning opportunities. What's the support being provided? How are you allowing teachers to implement and practice and then reflect on it in a structured way so that, they feel successful to continue with their implementation? What are the assessments you're looking at to measure the effectiveness? And hopefully then, how will this impact teacher beliefs? So, some things to keep in mind when you are planning and implementing your PD. You want to embed all knowledge building time within the realities of your school. So really thinking about your context, right? That's a key theme for this class. What is the context of your school? What will make sense and work for your school? Which is why it's not advisable to bring in consultants from outside who have no knowledge of your context to tell you, you need to implement this program. It needs to look this way. This is the flow. These are the activities. When they have no knowledge of how this will work for your current schedule, for your student population, as most scripted programs are not developed with your unique student needs in mind, you really need to be mindful of, if you are adopting such a program, how the implementation will look at your school site. So make sure to ground everything in the realities of your school. It's recommended you begin with the nuts and bolts or basics of the literacy program. So before you can teach them how to analyze assessment data, you need to first all get on the same page of what are our assessments and when are they given, right? Or before you talk about some of the different components of reading workshop, right? You need to first talk up, if you're wanting them to implement think alouds and read aloud, okay? Well, first we got to talk about what is read aloud. Where does that fall on our schedule? Make sure everyone has the common language, the common definition, the common idea, and everyone knows what implementation of read aloud should look like before you talk about some of the nuances of instruction. So start with the nuts and bolts and then build up from there. Then do your knowledge building sessions to target specific areas that teachers need to understand better. So that's essentially what I just said. Utilize a needs assessment to determine the focus of this. So you can think about your personal knowledge you have, as well as, observational data you've collected, student achievement data you've collected, And you can also survey teachers, and it's recommended that you do this at some point in time individually. I know I had a great school leader who came in. I helped open a school as the assistant principal, and then principals shifted in our third year. And the new principal came in and met with every single teacher individually, staff member, not just classroom teachers, and asked, what does the school need? Where are the growth opportunities and areas, which is so vital to get a better understanding of the school and its workings and to value the teachers and their opinions and insights. So definitely survey teachers privately about what they would like to see within the school's program for professional learning. So then you can create a cohesive professional development syllabus for the team and for the year. Remember, we should be planning professional learning for chunks of time at a time, for the entire year or several years, or maybe the next 5 years, because, drastically changing our writing instruction doesn't just happen in a few short months and then we can move on to something entirely different. So here's a sample of kind of a long-term, year-long plan I created for a school where we were working on improving writing instruction. It was the third year of the school, so we were at the point in time where we were ready to really look at writing, as that was somewhat neglected in the first 2 years of the school. And so, before school started, we started with guidelines for writers' workshops. So that was, and then also writers' notebooks, but that is, what are our instructional guidelines for writers' workshop? What are the components of writers' workshop? What are the time allocations? What do these look like? What is writers' workshop? We need a consistent idea and definition of this. Then once we did that, the next day we talked about kind of the how-to now. So, the pacing guides for topics, writing binders, other tools and materials for planning. So what is it and kind of the how it looks. Then we talked about assessment of writing, part 1, assessment of writing, part 2, rubrics. So you see how just within, writing instruction, we're really breaking it down topic by topic. We have whole group sessions happening and then other things happening in teams. Then we're talking about inquiry in writing, units of study, and integrating model texts. And so this is differentiated by grade levels there. Then we're talking about conferring, which is a higher level skill in having writers' workshop. Then using data from your writing conferences, planning your own unit of study, because up until this time, they've either been given it or they've collaboratively planned it. Then editing and revising. So really breaking it down, starting with the nuts and bolts and then building up to higher level skills. Here in your book, they give you components of a high quality PD. And these, again, will be things I'm looking at when you design your PD. But first is a focus on content. So we're not meeting to talk about field trip logistics or fundraisers or whatever it might be. We're really focused on the content, the standards, the curriculum, assessment data. We're reading professional books that are related to our needs and student needs. Also looking for active learning. So what kind of product is coming from your professional learning session? Could it be that teachers are grouping students for instruction? Could they be making small group differentiated lesson plans? Could they be differentiating a whole group lesson plan? Are they designing lesson plans for immediate use? Are they creating a unit? Are they creating a common assessment? So, what are they producing? Coherence. So the professional development should address teacher needs directly, and it should also include any state and district mandates. So, we shouldn't be hopping from topic to topic, but doing a really deep study of one topic throughout the year, which should lend itself to any state and district mandates. Next, duration. So you should be planning regular grade level team meetings, regular school-wide meetings, regular individual meetings and support systems. And so, with that, these should be hopefully embedded in your school day and not taking a lot of extra time away from your teachers. And then lastly, collective participation. So all adults who work with children at your site should be involved and know about the professional learning happening. There should be high collaboration with administrators who are also participating. If they're not driving the professional learning, they should be participating, not sitting back on their laptop typing during the training that the reading specialist is leading. All right, next they talk about using data, which we talked about earlier in the course, but presenting data as part of professional development is absolutely essential. It will show teachers the need for the professional learning. They talk about doing a state of the school address, which I always did. I was responsible for the K2 wing. So at the beginning of the school year, I did a state of the school address in December, in March, at the end of the year to kind of close the loop. So here you take the school-wide assessment systems data and use it to illustrate the extent to which your current literacy program is having the desired effect on children. Then you can have teams break out to look at how their data contributes to the overall puzzle. So, these are our school-wide averages. How does your team of, your grade level compare to that? Then presenting data and research that supports strategies that you are going to select to improve your state of the school. And then the data can also help you monitor the effectiveness of your PD, the student learning, everything. So within your professional support system, you need to, again, plan and embed assessments of teacher practice change, of student achievement, and then of, the PD itself, or, what they gained from that, some sort of exit survey. Also, make sure teachers are revisiting their data in ongoing PD as new data becomes available. The Glasswell et al. Article gives you concrete ideas for integrating data naturally into your approaches for PD, so take a look at that. All right, the last part of Chapter 10 talks about different approaches, and they break it down into things that are happening outside the classroom, so things like book clubs and study groups, or lesson planning, collaborative lesson planning, and things that happen inside the classroom, like observing and providing feedback, or doing a modeling or demonstration lesson. So I'll just quickly talk about each of these. Book clubs and study groups are highly valuable because they establish a collegial climate for teaching and learning. Instead of having the literacy specialist or coach be the know-it-all who does everything, this kind of helps teachers and the culture to feel like we are here learning together. And I know anytime I've, helped facilitate a book club or study group, I myself have learned a lot from the material and the discussion and from colleagues. So it really is a good opportunity to learn together. There are different purposes for doing book clubs. You can do them for professional learning. So here's a couple titles I've used for that. I've also had teacher teams who have kind of self-initiated to want to do a book study over the summer break, which is a great opportunity for them to do that. They have a little bit more time. So we've set up discussion blogs where they have then contributed to those, throughout the summer at agreed upon deadlines where they're discussing what they're learning and what they're thinking about that. You could also do a book club to model what a book club looks like and how it could look in the classroom. I've done that for SEED folks. Or you could also use it as a culture building opportunity. So I've done that with a few different things to just, kind of come together and talk about different ideas on culture. Some management issues to keep in mind: set a goal, choose appropriate readings that allow for teacher choice, schedule the reading times and meetings, share the responsibilities, which helps with investment, and then manage productive discussion. So you should have some sort of record keeping and forms that keep your discussions focused. Collaborative lesson planning is something else that can happen outside of the classroom. Oftentimes, book studies are great, but they're too broad for teachers to then move the ideas into actual practice. So collaborative lesson planning is a way to be proactive. I know a lot of times teachers, in sites I've worked at, teachers would submit their lesson plans to their administrator, the week of the plans, and then get feedback on them after they've already, implemented the plans. So we don't want to give feedback after the fact. If you're doing collaborative lesson planning, that enables you to give feedback right then and there before the lessons have been given. You can also do demonstration lessons and then co-planning sessions. These enable you to plan for and then with teachers a potential structure. You can share strategies and research and then give them a model plan or template to draft into. And then you can demonstrate the plan or model with the teachers as students, discuss how it went and tweak it before the teachers use it, and then release planning responsibility to them over time. All right, things that are happening in the classroom, approaches, observation and feedback. Observations are great because they produce data to show, how students are performing as a result of teacher practice. And without this data, you can make some incorrect assumptions when teachers say, oh yeah, I do that in my classroom. Well, this really helps you see what it looks like in the classroom. You want to make sure to take the school's culture into account when designing your professional support system. So if there isn't currently an open door policy and teachers aren't used to observing each other or being observed frequently, you're going to want to develop that. It's often recommended to start with peer observations because these are non-evaluative. Coaches can also do brief and frequent walkthroughs, keeping these as positive and encouraging as possible and really focusing the adjusting feedback. Again, make sure these are targeted. There are different forms you can use for giving feedback. You can use checklists or rubrics or open-ended notes. I'll show you some samples of that in a second. And then you can even create the observational checklist with the teachers during your book study or at a PD session. So then they have additional buy-in to the things that you're observing for because they're the ones who came up with the criteria. It's not you as the coach imposing these things upon them that might be, contradictory to their current belief system, but together you guys are all agreeing that these are best practices of effective instruction. And so that's what you're going to be looking for when you step into their rooms. So here's some samples of checklists I've used. One is for the beginning of the school year. It's a room environment classroom setup checklist. So just looking that they have all of these things within the classroom environment. Pretty straightforward checklist there. This is a guided reading checklist. So in our course of learning about guided reading and how guided reading should look in the classroom, we came up with the criteria on here for room environment, as well as components of an effective lesson. So that when I came in and observed, I could check off, yes or no, it's there, and then comments. These are more similar sort of checklists. These are from the New Teacher Center, and I use them for some induction or bits of work I did with teachers. But, here's the best practice vocabulary instruction, using explicit forms of academic English. So these are best practices that support language needs students. And so I can look for each of these things and then comment on how I did or didn't see them. Same thing here for students with learning disabilities. Here are some components of brain compatible instruction I can look for and then comment. Check off any of these things and comment, etc. So those are kind of more of checklists. This is a really interesting tool that can be used. It's a seating chart tool where you can kind of quickly diagram out the physical layout of the room, and then you can track movement patterns of the teacher. So, is the teacher always up here at the front of the board, or do they break the plane, circulate, move around? So if that's something you're working with a teacher on, you can do that. It can also show interaction patterns. So you can, on here tally the kids the teacher is interacting with. So you can, show them, oh, you called on this kid 5 times, but you never called on this kid. Or you can do behavior patterns where you can tally, kids who are off task based on, the physical layout of the room. So this is a interesting tool to use for a variety of purposes. Here's a sample rubric where you're looking at how they use a variety of instructional strategies. What's your evidence and where would they fall on this rubric? So, this is a very clear criteria that you would obviously give to the teachers in advance, go over it, and this is like a 20-page rubric. So maybe you're just focusing on one or two areas, observing those areas, and then giving feedback on this criteria. My tool of choice that I typically use when I observe teachers is an open-ended tool called selective scripting, where you write down the time, what the teacher's doing, what the student's doing, time, teacher, student. This is great because it shows, the elapse of time, so how long it takes them to transition to and from things, because I'm very concerned with time management and how time is being used effectively, because there just really is no time to waste. So I like to see exactly what's happening at what time and how long things are taking, what the teacher is doing versus how much of the work are the students doing. All right, and that brings me lastly to, we're going to talk about modeling, but just a reminder, and you'll read about this, is the observation cycle should include some sort of pre-observation discussion. So you and the teacher can talk about, what are you observing for? What are they hoping to improve? Get some background on the class, the students, the week, the unit they're on, that sort of thing. You do your observation. You then really need to take some time to process that observation. It's really hard for me when teachers ask for feedback right away, because I usually will write affirmations on a Post-it or on a notepad and give that to them so they have that initial feedback. But as far as adjusting feedback, I like to take time and really process it and think about what I want to focus on with them, because usually there might be a few things, but figuring out what's the highest priority. So then after this reflection process, you can meet. I like to meet in person to give feedback to the teacher, and then through that meeting plan next steps for professional development, which should then lead into, the next cycle of observation where you're seeing them implement what they've decided for next steps. All right, and lastly, in the classroom can be modeling. Outside of the classroom, it can be done in small and large group settings using kind of teachers as students. But then in the classroom, while individual or groups of teachers watch, you can provide modeling of demonstration lessons. I recommend making the most of your modeling by videoing it. I can't tell you how many times I wish I would have had more videos of me teaching in the classroom to show at trainings and whatnot. So I highly recommend anytime you do a demo lesson, because usually you're going to be planning that out in great detail, to not only video it, but also retain and keep all of the student work, the lesson plan, the teaching materials. All right, I want to wrap up. That's all that was shared in chapter 10. And I want to wrap up by talking quickly about these articles, but I highly recommend that you read them, because through these two examples, one at the elementary level, one at the secondary level, you'll see how different approaches to professional learning were applied to an actual school site. So first we have the article by some of my favorites, as you know, Fisher and Fry. And it is set at Rosa Parks Elementary School, which was the lowest performing school in the area. So back in the days of API, it was 455 in 1999. But they increased 291 points in just 6 years, which, is some time, but you need to invest the time to get results like nearly 300 points. So they also exceeded API growth growth targets every year for every subgroup, which is another huge accomplishment. So how did they do it? They created a task force, sounds like shared leadership, to develop a multi-year school-wide literacy plan. So thinking big picture implementation over several years. They identified their core beliefs. So what is important to us and the education we provide to our students? What is effective literacy instruction? What does that look like? So again, we have shared leadership, we have a unified vision. Then they developed a framework to guide their instructional decisions. So this was done through teacher modeling and independent learning. Last, they implemented and monitored. They created a feedback loop with lead teachers. So, through this implementation, you want to have ongoing implementation, but provide support. And they did that through the feedback loop. They also had building walkthroughs occurring. What PD was provided, they had professional development committee who is planning all of the learning experiences a school year in advance. So, we're not bringing in an outside consultant, but we have a committee within here who is making these decisions, and they're planning it a year in advance, not, the Thursday before the Friday all-staff PD. The plan is carefully linked with the literacy framework, which, as you remember, a component of effective PD is that it has a content focus. So we are focused on this content of the literacy framework. The teachers design, develop, and implement the plan. There are whole school seminars followed by grade level sessions where teachers examine student work. So these grade level teams aren't just filling the time, but they're analyzing student work. There are small group sessions where teachers are sharing examples from their instruction. There are learning communities 2 times a month, and there's also peer coaching. They have 5 full-time peer coaches, lit specialists, which I know is an anomaly that most schools can't count on. But you can see the levels of support here. We're giving whole school support, grade level support, small group support, learning communities, and one-on-one support through peer coaching. So many layers of support, which is great. What do the learning communities do? They set an agenda, they identify the professional readings, they discuss the readings, they share the student work, they plan for change, observe instruction, so peer observation, and then for accountability, they hold themselves accountable by typing up their meeting notes by Friday and then presenting at their final meeting. The findings from this research was that the school had a common purpose. As we saw, they were very focused on that literacy framework. The time on task and instructional time increased significantly, which I know is going to lead to an increase in student achievement. They improved the student habits, and there was continuity from and across grade levels. And then they had more professional learning, which was very deep, hands-on, rich professional learning. So great case study you may want to model after in your Part 3 assignment. And then the next one is from Nancy Wilson, Dana Grisham, and Linda Smetana for the secondary level, providing a year-long professional development initiative. So they did a study of a year-long professional development with secondary content area teachers. And the purpose was to increase the teachers' use of a literacy strategy known as question-answer relationships by Raphael and Al. And, this is a great strategy because no matter what disciplinary subject you teach, you can integrate this. So they prepared classroom materials or lesson plans, which incorporated the teacher's description of the strategy in open-ended questions, instruction, and written think-alouds. So professional development was framed around the idea that it must be active and that teachers need multiple exposures and experience with the techniques in order for learning to occur. The PD consisted of a demonstration of the research-based practice, a lot of reading of the professional literature and research to support this strategy, the teachers working in small groups to apply the content, and then visual models of the metacognitive implementation of the strategy. So they collected a lot of data here, which goes to the point that you need to embed those assessment measures that are showing student progress and change. From the teacher end, though, they collected lesson plans from the teachers where they needed to integrate QAR, and they analyzed and evaluated those plans. And then at the end of each PD session, they asked a common question to gauge the teacher's understanding of the learning they did that day on QAR so that they could see through the teacher responses how their learning is developing. They analyzed the data looking for themes and then also sorted responses into different types of knowledge, procedural, conditional, declarative, you can read more about those in the article. What they found is that teachers' understanding of QAR grew in a predictable manner. They demonstrated a deeper understanding as their lesson plans progressed. One weak area, though, was demonstrating conditional understanding, which is why you chose which QAR strategy in a specific instance. And as we know, that's not really a nut and bolt of that subject of QAR. That's more of one of those nuanced things that you then, once you've done the initial work on what is QAR, now we need to move into kind of conditionally, how do we apply it? All right, so hopefully you are starting to see some key themes and ideas for what makes for effective professional learning, content-focused, active learning, hands-on products, duration of time it's going, through the course of a year, over several years. All right, all of those will be important to consider in your plans, so that you can make a really nice structure for your case study, just as was done in the 2 articles you are reading. So have a great week. Email me with any questions and good luck.